Hello, this is yet another round of development administration and theories. We have been discussing this topic for a while now, and we have looked at the various topics that forms the gamut of discourse in its entirety. And it's easy for one to discern that our discussion so far have given us an idea of what development administration entails and the extent to which development is pursued across boards. We started by looking at the various theories of development, and then we sought to explain development from various perspectives. And in the course of that as well, we gave adequate explanation of what constitutes development within the ambit of the modernization school of thought. We also discussed development from other theoretical underpinnings, especially the ones that tend to project communal existence or the sharing of the material well-being of individuals from a common cause or from a centrally planned economy. We have equally looked at the angle of attaining development through procedural perspectives. And in the same vein, we looked at what underdevelopment is about, and then we discussed various theories of underdevelopment and the extent to which underdevelopment has become a menace in third world countries. In our last lecture, we looked at various characteristics of underdevelopment, but the emphasis was more on the economic aspect of underdevelopment, where we said that underdevelopment breeds poverty, connotes poor welfare of services and workers, poor infrastructural facilities. And we even looked at it from the angle of per capita income and the extent of the sustainability of the system in themselves, making references to undue interference by external forces, the dictates of the commanding heights of the economy of underdeveloped countries. So today we shall be looking generally at the environments of underdevelopment, with particular emphasis on the political environment, the socio-cultural environment, the administrative environment, and the efforts made within the confines of the civil service to promote development through reforms and deliberate attempts to boost the extent of work and services that are obtainable within the confines of the discussions on development. So having said that, I will be sharing my screen with you so that we all have an idea of what our discussion today will be centered on. Like I said earlier on, it is premised on a total discussion on the environment of development. And we say here that this unit deals with political features of underdevelopment. The features include ethnic, religious, and tribal conflicts, extra-legal change of leadership, and lack of continuity. Remember in the last class, our emphasis centered on the economic environment of underdevelopment. And we looked at an array of factors that connote underdevelopment when one looks at it from the economic angle. So today, emphasis is placed on the political sphere because there are features that are peculiar to the political terrain of underdeveloped societies, ranging from, like we have seen within the Nigerian context, so many parties with no particular ideology. We have seen military interference in politics. We have seen different levels of protests. We have seen politics being built around ethno-religious confines. And all this are an antithesis to development when compared to what is obtainable in the more advanced societies of the world. So it is easy for one to say that within the discussions of politics in our part of the world, ethnicity plays a very dominant role. Religion, the tribal or language affiliation, and certain extractions that are of sociocultural levels tend to play very significant roles to the extent to which politics is being played. If you look at the American system, for example, their play of politics is devoid of religion, is devoid of ethnicity. It does not have the kind of tribal affiliations that we have, that when somebody is from your place, you tend to give more support to the person than when the person is from another place, even if the person is not the best candidate for such a position. We know what is happening within our country today. So those are all political features of underdevelopment, and we shall be discussing them as we make progress. So one of the political features of the underdeveloped countries is the growing gap between expectations and the actual achievements. For example, when the Obasanjo administration took office in 1999, it promised to restore power supply to normalcy and provide employment for all. The realization of these noble objectives has fallen below expectations. So under the discussions of the political environment of development, we see that so many promises are made, manifestos are given, policy objectives and frameworks are churned out by political appointees and office holders. But at the end of the day, these do not come to reality. And it is not peculiar to Nigerian situation alone, but it is a known fact within various underdeveloped society. So we say that there is a high um unemployment and underemployment rate among the youths in undeveloped countries, which is also a pitfall when one looks at political shortcomings when development issues within the confines of underdeveloped societies are discussed. In such conditions, this age group present potent threats to political stability and economic growth, being less amenable to nationalist anti-imperialist rhetoric as a panacea for their problems. This is Mazurai's view on the political environment of development administration. In his own views, due to the levels of poverty and levels of unemployment and the inability to meet the political promises that are made during campaigns, it is easy to mobilize these young and unemployed youths to go into acts of rebellion and protests and so many things that would lead to destabilization of the system and poor economic growth in themselves. So due to the fact that political promises are not met, it tends to breed certain aspects that would lead to a total destruction or collapse of the entire system. So political environments are very necessary when one looks at issues of development administration. He goes further to say that an idle mind is a devil's workshop, which is an adage that is said within the confines of our own environment. And much of the political unrest of the African continent can be attributed to the presence of unemployed, frustrated, and alienated young people. They are easily drawn to parties and groups that promote total and revolutionary change rather than incremental and evolutionary change. If you observe well, they may have been in the forefront of the democracy movements in many of the African countries. I would not want to go into specifics, but however, we all understand the situation of Nigeria as at today. Due to the levels of unemployment, the levels of poverty, and the draconian policies of certain aspects of political parties and governments in this country, we have seen so many protests and so many dissatisfaction exhibited by the youths of this country. And it is not far from the shortcomings that are found within the political sphere, the inability of tailoring well-meaning and people-oriented policies to meet the needs and yearnings of the people can lead to a total collapse of the system. There are persistent ethnic, tribal, and religious conflicts. For example, the activities of the Odua People's Congress in the western part of Nigeria, Ariwa People's Congress in the northern part, Bakassi Boys in the east, or even ESN and all that, structures that could have assisted in integrative function. In brief, the common political features of developing countries include a widely shared developmental ideology as the source of basic goal, a high degree of reliance on the political sector for achieving results in the society, a widespread of incipient or actual political instability, a modernizing elite leadership accompanied by a wide political gap between the rulers and the ruled, and an imbalance in the growth of political institutions. Let me pause here for a while and explain some of these uh, issues mentioned before now. Take, for instance, within the conference of the Nigerian system, we have seen a lot of sectional and religious or even ethnic groups being formed that tend to go against government policies because they are not people oriented. And the sad part of it all is that within the Nigerian system, they lay claim to certain tribal or ethnic affiliations, like the OPC, for example. These are all bodies that are formed that ordinarily should be in the interest of the political integration of the country. But because of the challenges that are inherent within the political system that we practice, they now are found to be doing things that are not in conformity with political yearnings and aspirations that should ordinarily lead to development within the country. So we have all these bodies and more are springing up by virtue of the fact that there is a shortcoming of the demands or the needs of the people that should be met politically. Some versions of socialism tends to be the dominant preference with a philosophy having a Marxist label, while evils of foreign capitalism are denounced. The state is generally seen as the main hope for guiding society towards modernization. The politics played is agitational. Political instability is a prominent feature, as surveys have shown that 40% of the countries have had successful or attempted coups. Compared to developed countries, the politics of the developing country is that of uncertainty, discontinuity, and extra legal change. Before now, I made reference to military intervention in politics as one of the features of an underdeveloped society when one looks at the political terrain. And the argument for this military intervention is always within the premise of corruption or bad governance or the inability of politicians to hold the country as an indivisible entity, and so many other factors that we see happening in our country today. So these are all features of political underdevelopment that are inherent in the economies, in the societies, in the environment of third world countries. And they have not fared properly when one measures the indices of development that is obtainable in other parts of the world. So another aspect of the environment of the administration is the socio-cultural aspect. Remember when we began this discussion, we talked about ethnic affiliations, tribal affiliations, religious affiliations as all elements that hamper smooth and effective pursuit of development. So the sociocultural aspect is another very important variable that we'll be looking at here. And we say in undeveloped countries, superstition is a key sociocultural feature. For example, in many parts of Africa, people attribute their problems to supernatural factors such as an angry deity, curses, witchcraft, etc., etc. And an important aspect of this very subtopic is the fact that we have theories that have sought to explain why underdevelopment ravages in all these underdeveloped societies. And we looked at roster stages of development. And there are also theories that have said that the internal practices, the norms and values that are inherent in these societies are inimical to development. Like we know in some parts of this country where people are not allowed to enter into certain places, or at some levels, they don't allow certain categories of persons to go to school. We have seen those things before now, and they still continue to happen. So this falls under the sociocultural environment of underdevelopment, and they go a long way in hampering the extent of development that ordinarily should take place. So we are quick to lay attributes to issues of culture and tradition as to be the practices or to be the resultant effect of some of the challenges that people face. And that is why under this discussion now, we talk about causes, witchcraft, angry deities to be the cause of certain aspects. So people hold on to these cultural views tenaciously. And because their beliefs are tailored in this direction, they tend to hold these sociocultural practices as the cause of the development challenges that are faced. In this view, man is at the mercy of bewildering array of unseen, often malevolent forces that are beyond his control. The sufferer may experience some relief when a culturally accepted explanation for his problem is provided. For instance, his problem explained as being caused by witches. The fact that these forces are seen as beyond his control but amenable to the intervention of the traditional healer renders the sufferer more open to his suggestion. Is a person considered healed when he continues to live in fear of individuals and unseen forces in his environment? Our answer should be no. The point here made is that people lay claims to the challenges they face in life to all these metaphysical forces or forces beyond their immediate understanding and control, which is not necessarily so when one measures issues of development. Like the very advanced countries do not believe in the fetish aspect of certain practices that we see here and lay claims to be as a result of the challenges or the economic woes that people are faced with. A good example is how we have churches and mosques and healing houses everywhere. Those are not seen in advanced countries because they have followed the path of development as it should be. So they have been able to relegate these traditional practices to give way to modernity. And now they are saying that these sociocultural features do not promote development. Rather, they retard the extent of development that an individual should or an economy should experience. So the bottom line there is that there are practices that are inimical to development and they fall under the sociocultural aspect. So we say further that the price of a nation pays for being uncritical of the beliefs held by the citizens that their lives are controlled by forces outside their control is grave indeed. Apathy becomes the predominant attitude of such citizens and underdevelopment a resultant consequence. They believe that anyone with the help of the supernatural may bring harm to others, does little to promote mutual trust. In the absence of trust, individuals cannot cooperate in engineering solutions to pressing national or community issues. So the time that one should put into the pursuit of developmental agendas are now being taken away by seeking solutions under these traditional practices that are not in themselves real hallmarks of development and are not found in very advanced societies. It is difficult for you to see a white man, take for instance an American, be living in some age-old practices that we have here in Africa. So the point under this discussion is that these are values or principles and practices that negates development, but are upheld in this part of the world and has become a feature of underdevelopment. So if you read down, you will see other examples, particularly as it concerns rural environment and then other attributes of an underdeveloped society built around sociocultural features. We say that the age dependent on their adult sons and daughters for support. Hence, fertility remains high in order to guarantee enough children to meet the need. Developing countries like those of Africa have the fastest growing population rate. Most of them have large areas of land with population scattered, largely rural, and often involved tribal groupings alienated from functional government. People are differentiated on the basis of race, tribe, and religion. Tribal sentiment usually determine the pattern of voting or appointment to positions of responsibility. Most of the time, merit is compromised, and this affects executive capacity and consequently national development. So, under the sociocultural features of development, we have seen that strict adherence to traditional values are inimical to development, and other aspects too that are not in tandem with the practices that should enhance development are also upheld and they form a major challenge to development. Another attribute of an underdeveloped society is within the confines of administrative development administration is administrative features of underdevelopment. There is usually an effective bureaucracy coupled with a vigorous modernizing elite. The basic pattern of administration is imitating rather than indigenous. In Nigeria, for instance, the current administrative laws are those introduced by the British some 50 to 100 years ago. Nigerian civil servants commonly claim that their system follows the British system. Such claims are made with pride, and are supposed to demonstrate the pedigree and quality of their civil service. They failed, though, to note that the system is based on a British colonial model rather than the British domestic model. What this point is trying to say is that within the confines of the civil service or the administrative system that we practice in Nigeria, we are quick to lay claim to borrowing these ideas from Sorry, I think someone logged me out. I don't know how that happened anyway. So I was saying that when one looks at the civil service, it is a borrowed idea within the confines of our environment. So somehow they do not suit the nature and character of our society. And they are not, in the actual sense of it, the practice that are within the countries where we borrow this idea from. And they are basically set up with the mind of meeting colonial interests and heritages. So they were not really set up to suit the nature and character of our society or to meet our own demands in the pursuit of development. So all this put together becomes a challenge to us as we have now been cut short from our own indigenous practices, and at the same time, we cannot entirely fit into the system that is practiced in these developed societies. Like in Kladake's book on political economy of Africa, he described it as the complexity and discontinuity in the internal process of state creation. So you borrow the ideas of these advanced countries that you cannot implement properly here, and you are not following your own ideas. So it becomes a tautology in its entirety. It becomes a challenge to you because somehow you are neither here nor there. So the colonial heritage is more elitist, more authoritarian, more aloof and paternalistic in these developing countries. Bureaucracy maintains sole ownership of technical knowledge in the various sectors from agriculture to mining and industry. It is usually the sole employer of professional experts, most often trained in the country of the former colonial masters. Uh, an understanding of that would be that you see that we are quick to rush to these foreign countries to even submit our budget proposals to discuss our politics with them, like we know of the regular travels to Chatham House to defend our political plans and ideologies and all. Ordinarily, it shouldn't be so. But because we are an underdeveloped society, we tend to hand out everything and then wait for the decisions of these colonial masters before we embark on certain practices. So our civil service is built in that direction, and it has not fared well when one looks at the general levels of development of the country. Frederick refers to this as preference for personal expediencies as against public principled interests. Value attached to status is based on ascription rather than achievement. Outwardly, they preach a merit system but practice a spoil system. Corruption is widespread and bureaucracy is used as a social security program to solve an employment problem, which in turn leads to a padded bureaucracy. There is widespread discrepancy between form and reality, what Rig refers to as formalism. So the system practiced here, especially as in regards to the civil service, is one where there is high corruption because we tend to serve the interest of these advanced countries. And because of these practices that are not in conformity with the nature of our environment, they breed underdevelopment on this side of the world. So there's also the issues of ascription rather than achievement. People are recognized or on the premise of their affiliations to political leadership or the administrative environment or hierarchy, rather than looking at the levels of achievement and qualification of an individual to man certain positions. So all these are features of an underdeveloped society when one looks at administration as a yardstick. So having said that, efforts have been made to counteract the levels of underdevelopment, particularly as it concerns the civil service. Our last discussion in the last slide was on administration. So this very topic here now, deem it fit to look at the reforms that have taken place as a way to pursue development within the confines of the civil service. There have been various reforms, even from the pre-colonial or pre-independence era to post-independence era, all in the bid to stimulate development and to pursue people-oriented policies within the civil service. Like we all know, the civil service is the engine room of the government. They implement all government policies and programs, or all policies and programs of the political class. So the relevance of the civil service in the pursuit of development cannot be overemphasized. Hence, Nigeria has tried to approach development by looking at the various reforms that have taken place within the Nigerian civil service. And we say that the evolution of the modern civil service in Nigeria can be traced generally to those of the Second World War. As we discussed in the last unit, specific landmark events in the evolution started with the 1954 review of the Macpherson's Constitution, which was not only a response to the independence movement, but also a response to the forces of regionalism and ethnicity. By this time, the need for the establishment of regional government and consequently, regional civil service was recognized and accepted. This period also marked the beginning of the process of dismantling the colonial civil service in Nigeria, which hitherto, as all other British African colonies then, was composed of two broad classes: the senior service, covering all posts reserved for the Europeans, and the junior service, embracing all posts to which Nigerians were appointed. Remember before now, I talked about how the civil service tends to reflect or is modeled along what suits the nature and character of the British society. So when they tried to transform or replicate the same thing here, they did it such a way that the higher positions were reserved for Europeans alone. And then Nigerians, or as it concerns other third world countries or African countries that have British heritage, now man the lower cadre of the civil service. So decisions are made from the British hierarchy and then forced on Nigerians, even if it does not suit what should ordinarily work within our own system. So you see that the civil service was even built on a faulty foundation from the onset. And sad enough, that is what is still being pursued till date within the country. So various reforms began to spring up as a way to redirect the civil service to meet the needs of our own environment. So one of those reforms was the goals⁵ report of 1954, which made some far-reaching recommendations ranging from the division of the service into four broad classes corresponding to the general educational standard of the time. There were the subclerical and manipulative, clerical and technical, executive and higher technical, and the administrative and professional classes. So within this recommendation, the civil service was divided into 4 classes, as I have mentioned here now. The system was modeled on the civil service which existed in Britain during the period of decolonization. However, the public service began to undergo some significant changes in both its complexity and the responsibility assigned to it. In 1948, for example, there was a general directive from the Colonial Office in London to the colonial government instructing them to expand the task of government to include reforms of local government as a means of mobilizing the local humans and material resources for socio-economic and political development. Along with this development, there was the expansion of the bureaucracy and establishment of public operations. So we inherited the civil service from the British practice. But in the real sense of it, what is obtainable in Britain and other countries that form the United Kingdom is different from the kind of civil service that they implemented and recommended for this underdeveloped environment. So the civil service here is basically to serve the interests of these advanced countries and not to meet the yearnings and aspirations of our own societies. So having said that, the high hopes raised by nationalists and the anxiety of the post-independence leaders of Nigeria to achieve quick socio-economic development of the country and the availability of more resources, especially the oil windfall in the 1970s, greatly contributed to the expansion of the size and responsibilities of the civil service bureaucracy. At the federal level, for example, in 1960, there were only 12 ministries with a total of 60,000 staff. By 1978, the number of ministries and staff strength had risen to 25 and 187,000 respectively. And by 1984, the number of employees stood at 302,000. So it kept on growing and growing that way. And then the number of states also increased, and there was more responsibilities accorded to the civil servants in the formation of the government of the day. The phenomenal growth in the size and responsibilities of the service, and in particular, the realities of the social, economic, and political situation within which it operated, made the institutions to become embroiled in many serious problems, e.g., red tapeism, rigidity, corruption, nepotism, ineffectiveness, and inefficiency, conservatism, etc., etc. So all these were accompanied by the structure we inherited from this British arrangement. These challenges posed for the civil service made it a subject of many inquiries by the government, all in an attempt to improve it. Such inquiries include the goals⁵ report of 1954, the Adebo Commission on the Review of the Salary Structure of the Civil Service 1971, the Udoji Commission 1974, the 1988 Civil Service Reforms, the AIDA Panel 1994, the Civil Service in 1994, according to the Udoji Commission, was almost a caste-like system. The career structure meant that civil servants was recruited at an early stage into the service with an implied promise of a life career, during which he was to work his way through the hierarchy of the service. This promise of a life career meant an assurance of lifelong employment, which could be terminated only by mental or physical incapacity or the commission of a criminal offense. So you see these various reforms that were made were all designed to build the civil service to work towards an attainment of development status for the country in general. Prominent among these reforms, and like we know, is the Udoji Commission, because that one is significant in the sense that it even recommended the increment in the salaries of workers. So all these were done with the hope that when the morale of the worker is high and there is recognition of the contributions of the worker to the system in themselves, they will be more committed to providing the desired services that would spur development. But this is not without challenges. So these various challenges of these various commissions led to more commissions and more reforms being made, all with the agenda to improve the civil service. So The structure was closed because it had no adequate provision for the admission of outsiders, well qualified and experienced persons. In the higher grades of the hierarchy, such a career and closed system did not provide enough incentives for change, modernization, or the achievement of excellence, and could lead to inbreeding and obsolescence. Obsolescence affects not only the structure, but also organization and management. The reform of the Odoji Commission in particular, that talked about people being recruited into the service and then staying there for a lifetime a job, like, okay, as it is known today, now it is 35 years in service or 60 years of age. So the shortcoming or the pitfall that was seen from that recommendation is the fact that if people are to hold on to their jobs for that long and do not give room for outsiders to come into the system, it means, therefore, that you can only make do with what is available. And expert knowledge that can come from the outside environment is not allowed. So that system did not meet the demands of the civil service. Hence, there was the need for other reforms after the Odoji report. Like I said earlier on, the Odoji Commission stands out and their recommendations owing to the fact that there were more people-oriented practices, and they saw that the welfare of the civil servant to a large extent can enhance his contribution towards development. So various governments paid attention to the recommendation of this commission, even though it had its challenges like we have mentioned earlier on, saying that the extent to which people can be brought from the outside into the system to man certain positions that requires professionalism and expertise is not really there in the recommendation. In its report, the Odoji Commission made far-reaching recommendations on making the civil service a result-oriented system. It recommended introduction of such management techniques as management by objectives, project management, program and performance budgeting. The Political Bureau 1987 noted that the above recommendations of the Commission were not accepted by the government and therefore not implemented. The 1988 reforms, like the Odoji Commission, recommended that emphasis in the civil service should be on management rather than on administration. So there are so many other reforms that were made that if you read along, you will find them, especially as it concerns grading of people within the system, like from level 1 to 6 to be under certain categories, 7 to 11, I think, under certain categories and beyond. And we have them all captured here that when you read along, you would see. So the former arrangement tended to favor the generalists over the professionals. However, it is worth noting that the closed career system which the civil service has hitherto been is likely to continue, as there will be very few instances where direct appointments would be to higher positions, which is seen from grade level 11 and above. From outside, most of what will happen with such position is that they will be filled through promotions or what a personnel management expert calls selection from inside the service. The phenomenal growth in the size and responsibilities of the civil service has produced such a diffusion of power that the task of central direction and coordination has become extremely difficult. The Office of the Secretary to the Government, which is formally responsible for the coordination of all activities of ministries and departments of government and for ensuring the efficiency of the functioning of departments of as machinery of government, as Udoji noted, was not adequately equipped to perform the role of either coordinating or overseeing the efficiency of the government machinery. This situation led to the problems such as red tapeism, rigidity, conservatism, inefficiency, and all that. So these challenges were even in the system before these recommendations were made by these various commissions. But they did it in such a way that they now sought to recognize the extent of the contribution of the real people of the Nigerian system in itself and not making reference to the British system any longer. So their recommendations to a large extent met certain aspects, particularly as it regards instilling the feeling of discipline and professionalism within the civil service. So it has its high points as well as its shortcomings, and other inputs were made by other commissions and other recommendations were also pursued. So the Odoji Commission met a civil service reading with corruption, and it made the following. We live in a society in which corruption is generally believed to be, and no doubt is widespread. It is unrealistic for Nigerians to say that government will eliminate corruption completely from its public service, but it must make it one of its prime objectives to control corruption. The 1988 reform took a tough stance on accountability by saying that the accountability of an officer shall not cease by virtue of his leaving office, as he may be called at any time after leaving office to account for his tenure. Before the 1988 reform, the minister commissioner was the political head of the ministry, while the permanent secretary was the administrative head as well as the accounting officer. A situation in which the administrative head of the ministry was also the accounting officer rather than the political head has tended to frustrate many noble projects of the government. As accounting officer, the administrative head often placed unnecessary bureaucratic obstacles to quick execution of such projects. The 1988 reforms made the minister or the commissioner both the chief executive as well as the accounting officers of the ministry. So within this recommendation of the Odoji Commission and how it patterned the system and shared power between the permanent secretary and minister or commissioner, as the case may be, sought to have some rift within the system, because it now became a system where there is power tussle between the permanent secretary and the minister in most cases. We still see it in the service today, where you have some super permanent secretaries that are even more powerful than ministers that are brought in. And then sometimes the minister's decision can be relegated to the background, and then the permanent secretary, his own view holds sway or reigns supreme. So that has been a major challenge in the system. But however, with the 1988 reform, power was vested in the minister as the chief executive and the accounting officer of any ministry that he or she is posted to. But in practice, we still see crisis here and there, and that to a large extent necessitates why there is constant reforms within the civil service. Let me take you back a bit again. The minister, the chief executive, would be in total control of men, material, and money, which are critical inputs in the management of the organization. As accounting officer, he would also be responsible and accountable for administration, personnel, and finances of the organization. In prescribing these functions for the minister, the task force was evidently aware that his efficiency and output may be impaired because of too much responsibility. So it recommended that he delegates a substantial part of his function to the permanent secretary, who in the new structure would be director general. The Nigerian civil service was divided into two broad segments, namely the administrative and professional cadres. The permanent secretary headed the former, that's the administrative cadre, at the apex. Below, who were the executive, the clerical and the subclerical officers. The latter was headed by professionals such as engineers, doctors, agriculturalists, agricultural officers, etc., who reported to the political head of their ministries through the administrative officers. Below, then, were the technologists, technicians, and those engaged in manually appointed positions. I think that is not entirely complete. The permanent secretaries were head of the various ministries. As such, they were the principal advisors to the ministers and commissioners. So what this is saying is that with the 1988 reform, which is an improvement or a departure from the Odoji Commission, is the fact that roles were clearly spelled out. The minister has his own functions, and the permanent secretary, instead of playing an almost equal role, is now considered as a direct subordinate to the minister and gives advice and man certain positions and takes decisions on behalf of the minister, but subject to the acceptance of the minister, who is now considered as the chief executive and the accounting officer of the organization. So this generalist and specific dichotomy has been targeted by successive civil service reforms during the last 2 decades for eradication. The Odoji Commission tried to resolve this conflict by evolving only one hierarchical structure, which is under the unified grade system, into which every cadre should fit. There were 17 distinct ranks and a range of salary attached to each rank for the purpose of salary administration. So these various commissions or panels of inquiry and reforms that were set up within the civil service were all built to make certain improvements and certain adjustments in areas where they consider that it would be in the interest of the society to do such an improvement and an adjustment. So The lowest category of grades within the civil service today is level 1 to 6, which consists of the junior staff of the civil service, the messenger, typists, stenographers, craftsmen, artisans, and technical assistants. The next category of grades is 07 to 09. They are the supervisory, intermediate, and lower management staff, including executive officers. The third broad category consists of the middle management staff, grade level 10 to 13, who perform the bulk of the administrative and professional functions within the ministries and departments. At the top of the hierarchy is the upper management category, which is grade level 14 to 17. This category of staff constitutes the leadership group, and they are responsible for the policy and general management. Thus, a generalist and professional would both be on the same grade level, say 16 and 17. This, in theory, meant that anybody who qualifies could hold the post of permanent secretaries in any ministry. In practice, however, most permanent secretaries were still drawn from the generalist cadre. Thus, even though the conflict has lessened, it was still a phenomenon in the system. This conflict was finally erased by 1988 civil service reforms, which professionalized the service, as every officer was expected to acquire the necessary expertise through relevant specialized trainings and experience. The 1988 reforms concentrated more on the intra-bureaucratic power or authority realignment aimed at ensuring clearer channels for easy communication flow and lines of authority that clearly define the locus of responsibility and accountability. As we know it today, if we have civil servants in our midst, you would confirm that there is still the rift between those in the executive cadre and those in the administrative cadre. In fact, there is even a ceiling that under certain categories, certain personnel or officials cannot rise beyond level 14, no matter the levels of qualification such a person has. So this, to a large extent, has been a major challenge within the civil service. In theory, it is that it has been eradicated, and that, to a large extent, is done with the idea that it will promote professionalism and development. But in practice, these little challenges still tend to hamper the extent of the potency of the civil service that ordinarily should be a vehicle for development. So this is likely, according to Abdulsalami, to facilitate decision-making and thereby improve administrative efficiency and effectiveness. However, for better and for far-reaching results, more comprehensive reforms are imperative to usher in modern management techniques, new attitudes that are change-conscious and development-oriented. The criticism that trailed the discarded 1988 reform was enormous. On the vanguard was Chief Adebo, who said that he preferred what existed before the so-called reforms. The criticism, among other things, led to the setting up of the AIDA panel in 1994 to review the existing system. By December of the same year, the interim report was ready. He suggested the dropping of the Director General title and the restoration of the order. The full report was submitted to the government in I think it should be 96, not 66, from the above discussion. It is clear that the civil service occupies a very strategic position in the socio-economic and political development of this country. It is the most central of the institutions of government, which should be the prime mover of the social and economic development of the country. It is also evidence that there are serious problems which have impeded its efficient functioning. For the civil service to play its proper leadership role in the new political system envisaged for the country, it must be reoriented and restructured. So in summary, in this unit, the structural and operational features of the Nigerian civil service have been discussed. Some recommendations of various commissions were also discussed, and they together guide an understanding of the internal workings of the Nigerian civil service and how it originated in the British model and how it is tailored in the pursuit of overall development of the country. So having said that, it is easy for one to understand that the civil service, though was inherited from the British colonial practices, has undergone certain reforms that have tended to build it towards the actualization of developmental goals and objectives of the system, being the major vehicle through which government policies are implemented. So the role of the civil service in the pursuit of development cannot be overemphasized. So at this point, we have come to the end of this lecture, we shall now open the floor for questions and contributions, and then suggestions or whatever you feel will enrich the class. I think today we have a number of persons, which is highly commendable. Then we hope that you can unmute yourself and make your contributions or suggestions as the case may be. Okay. Hey, Jiro Roland. Yes, you can unmute yourself and speak.
Good evening, sir.
Thank you. Good evening.
Yeah, it's been a long time that we want to be in this class, but we have not been opportune. Thank God that we are opportune today. We have, personally, I have something to ask,
Okay.
which outside this course, aside what we are discussing now, I have something to ask within what we are discussing now.
Okay,
So
fine. Go
let
ahead.
me ask the one. Our TMA, our TMA. It's
Okay.
like there were errors in the questions that were set. And this contributed to us not really getting much of the answer. In fact, some of us did not perform well as a result of the way the question was set. Maybe there were omissions and something like so. We appreciate it if you can assist by looking into it. Many of our colleagues they really find it easy compared to other courses. So that is one. Then two, sir, with regard to what we have just discussed now, you made mention of that the full report was submitted to the government. So you made mention of 1966 and you made mention of 1986. So I wouldn't know which one specifically you mean there. The full report was submitted to the government in 1966, according to this doji something. You
It
are trying
should be
to
1986. It should be
86.
1986. Yes, it's an
All
error.
right, sir. So those are the two things that I want to know.
Okay,
Thank you, sir.
let me address the second one, which is the first one you asked about the TMA. Yes, I think I have heard that from even the school, and then the more you make your complaints, the more the adjustments will be made. Because you know how the system of the school is. We facilitate, others set the questions that you see, there are others that do the markings. So it is not fused in one person. So I have noted your complaint and I would still inform the authorities about it. But however, if you know the particular questions now that are not properly drafted, you can say them now, or maybe much later, you email them to me, then I'll submit to the school authority. And then as regards you attending the class for the first time, we have been holding lectures, other persons have been coming, but I realized that almost all the emails sent out, I don't know, every day we send emails out. Every day we have to have lectures, emails are sent out. And
Please,
then we seem not to be getting the desired number online. So
present, sir, I've not received an email, and I've been receiving the email of other courses.
I've given
I've
my
not received
number.
just once.
I have
I've
given
not
my
received it
number out
personally.
severally. I've given my number out severally that I should be added to a WhatsApp group. But I was told you people don't have a WhatsApp group, because I know that sometimes these emails, maybe they are not properly arranged, and then you send them out, they fail. Most times I get a lot of failed mail alerts. But the ones that go through, I still don't see people in class. Like I sent the email today for this lecture like around 2 o'clock. And I'm surprised there's just a few persons that we have online. But I was told that the email submitted to the school have issues and they are working on it. I don't know how true that is anyway. But if you have a class WhatsApp group, you can add me up, or you can even send me your personal questions and whatever areas you want us to discuss further. I've given my number out severally, but I'm still going to give it out today so that if you have any question or any contribution to make that you cannot make now, maybe when you read through and you have things to ask, you can private chat me. But it should be strictly on what we have discussed here. Anything outside that, I might not be disposed to it. So my number still is 080 36 11 3243. So you can bring up your questions. We discuss them before your exams and all. So any other question or contribution? I think we have 2 minutes to the end of this class.
We do respect, sir.
Okay.
We opened the WhatsApp yesterday, which I have added you.
Okay.
Yes, then please, I would like you to, on that WhatsApp, today's lecture, if you can send it to us so that we can digest it very well, we can equally copy it and read it, please.
Okay. Okay. I'll send it to the WhatsApp group. But again, you should understand that it is always sent on the school platform. So all the lectures, we post the address on the school platform that you can watch it at your own time. But if you want it on the WhatsApp group, I would still send it to the WhatsApp group.
Okay,
but for the lectures before now, they are all there. So you can do well to check them there.
Okay, sir.
Just go to the facilitation sessions and then you will see all of them being displayed there.
Okay, sir. Sir, please, again, in respect of that TMA, this course is the lowest course that I scored. Please, they should just consider, because after, I can't imagine after doing TMA, I got 2/10. 2/10. Even the answer, I saw it, everything. So please, you have to consider us. They will look into it again.
Yes, like I said earlier, I'll take it up with the department. I'll let them know. But
okay, sir.
These functions are given to different individuals. Like my role in this course is facilitation. I don't do the markings, but I'm going to take it up with the department. Let them know that there's a challenge with the TMA, and perhaps they should do whatever needs to be done to ensure people don't fail.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay,
sir,
thank you too.
we would like to do revision with you, maybe after the next facilitation.
Okay, that's fine. No problem.
Yes,
I'm open
sir.
to it.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
All right. So I think we have exhausted our time entirely, and we're told not to cross into other times because it will affect other lectures. So at this point, I think we'll call it an evening. See you in the next class. So thank you and have a nice evening.
Good night, sir.
Good night, sir. Thank you, sir.